with scars, contradictions, fractures, the Arab League and the European Union have tried these days to put on the table matters that cross the Mediterranean to reach agreements. This is the beginning of a new dialogue that still has no significant conclusions. What is missing for a more sound Euro-Arab association? What does one bloc give to another? How does obedience or disobedience to U.S. policies influence the alliance with Israel that kills innocent Palestinians, and the need to asphyxiate Iran, and the non-recognition of a president like Bashar al-Assad in Syria and his struggle for sovereignty and to end the war, a European Union, Arab League, common visions. This is our critical move today. Let's look at news, history, and actors involved. European and Arab leaders celebrated the first bilateral summit on February 24-25 in Sharm el-Sheikh, a tourist complex in the peninsula of Sinai, only 400 kilometers south of the terrorist group self-proclaimed Islamic State. Nuclear weapons, migrant crisis, Middle East crisis with special emphasis in Palestine and Syria, and commercial agreements have been the topics included in the agenda. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the host, and the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, co-chaired the encounter. This is an optimistic declaration of the European Commission, who was also there leading the community bloc. There's a broad intersection between the Arab and the world and the European world. Our diversities, discrepancy, differences, especially regarding human rights, cannot keep us from thinking of our future optimistically. If you believe that we will meet 24 hours in Sharm el-Sheikh and then there will be peace in the region, you are believing in Santa Claus. The goal is to learn and exchange and try to find common problems and joint solutions. Well, we also added a part of the media, the declarations made by the media. Let's go to our digital sites, Prensa Latina, written by Nicolás Valdés, who wrote the news from Cairo. Arab League and European Union dialogue, empty dialogue on the Middle East. The attendants recognized the essential role of the UN nations for Palestinian refugees in the Middle East and reaffirmed the need to support it politically and financially. In the case of Syria, Libya, and Yemen, we also recognize the mediating role of the United Nations in those territories, and that this was all the pronouncements on the region. There was a reaffirmation with the processes that the UN is leading, what results, how accepted they are in conflicted countries. These are questions we make to transfer them to our guests. The other webpage says Voltaire.net, the European Union and Arab League against the Centuries Treaty of the United States. Clear opposition to Trump's plan for Palestine, and that ignores international law. When the European Union addressed the conflict, Israel and Palestine set on the table solution based on the rules of law that can contradict international law itself, as in the case of the recent decisions of European Union on Venezuela, by executing Sharm el-Sheikh Declaration that sets as a red line international law. The community bloc is going back to classic terminology that beforehand is in opposition to the solution that the White House is giving, the so-called agreement of the century that Trump has been talking about in the last quarter of the last year. we will later analyze this. We have news from Damascus, Syria. Our correspondent Hisham Wanous. Greetings, colleagues and viewers. Last February 25, the first summit of the European Union and the Arab League concluded in Egyptian city Sharm el-Sheikh, chaired by Donald Tusk and Egyptian President Sisi. They exchanged opinions on the threats to international peace and security, including terrorism and radicalization, the illegal traffic of weapons, organized crime, and the crisis of migrants, as well as climate change, investments, and the solution of conflicts in the Middle East. The final notice says that the representatives of Arab countries and the European Union recognize that peace and security, human rights, and social economic development can only be achieved by joint work. They agreed to continue with cooperation addressed to analyze the deep causes of terrorism and also combat these challenges that radically exclude all methods of support to terrorists, including financial, political, logistic, and military support. But note also underlines the importance of preserving world architecture of non-nuclear proliferation and keep Middle East free of massive destruction weapons. Regarding the Syrian crisis, the summit underlined that a sustainable solution of the Syrian conflict needs an authentic political transition in accordance with Geneva Resolution of 2011 and UN resolutions, especially 1254. And even if the catastrophic situation that Syria lives results from the policies of many of the countries participating in the summit, all participants agreed to condemn all violations of rights against the Syrian people and underline the need for all parties to be accountable. In the case of Yemen and Libya, the parties said that there was the need to preserve unity, territorial integrity, and independence of those countries. This is a clear double standard and aligned to the reality of rights. European countries also ratified their position of conditioning their contribution to rebuild Syria with a political change in the Arab country. The European Union also criticized the rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia, stating that it unstabilized the region that also touches Europe. While Saudi Arabia reported what it calls a growing Iranian influence in the region, we must say that the final note was approved in spite of the Saudi rejection, United States, Bahrain, and Lebanon, because it does not include its cooperation between with the European Union. They agreed that the next summit will take place in 2022 in Brussels. This is the information we have for now. Thank you, Hisham, for this summary. This Egyptian summit has been a first between both blocs, the Arab League and the European community. What do they expect from each other, and what has been the European foreign policy with the countries of the Middle East and Maghreb, those that are part of the Arab League, and what is the relation with the United States? We'll analyze this after this first pause. European Union Arab League common goals. This is our critical move today. The meeting that gathered 50 leaders of one another bloc at times where the regions, the Middle East and Maghreb, with the European interference, have several countries in war, and in times when the European Union is harshly questioned by Brexit, and a nationalist wave that is challenging the bloc. They held this summit where no great decisions were made. On Palestine and the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, item 7 of the document says that the blocs agree on reiterate the commitment of reaching a solution between the states on United Nations resolution as the only realistic way to end with occupation. Paradoxically, the Egyptian president and Saudi president agreed on the need to end the system, even if they have very good relations with Israel, that refused acknowledging the Palestinian state. Federica Mogherini also said that a solution should be sought, but no solutions were stated. King Salman accused terrorists of being financed by Iran, something that the Iranians deny. This is a danger for the regional stability, but Iran blames the United States, Israel, and the Saudi monarchy. Regarding nuclear weapons, this also created divisions. Just the document signed by 5 countries with Iran, of which the United States withdrew. The Arab countries of the Gulf, mostly Sunnite, stepped back because of the Islamic Republic. The topic on human rights and democracy, according to European nations, are violated in Arab countries. But the difference were not significant enough so as to conclude the meeting. These had general agreements that did not reach any conclusion. Europe did not take responsibility on any matter. There is a cultural exchange, and they need to deepen the economic and commercial relation. I would like to go to Público in Spain that talks about the general chaos between the north and south of the Mediterranean, published on February 26th after the summit by Eugenio Garcia Gascon, who says that last week it was clear that the 2 engines of European Union, Germany and France, are divided in selling weapons to Saudi Arabia and its allies because of the Yemeni war. Germany wants to stop selling weapons to Saudi Arabia because of that reason, while France continues selling and insists because it's a good business besides the colossal tragedy they are creating. If Germany and France do not agree on such elementary topic, how can they agree on more deeper matters, asks the author of this note. We add analysis, our guests from Argentina, Abu Faisal, writer, political consultant on Middle East matters. And from Spain, we have Arid Saidi Olartua, international analyst. Welcome both. Thank you very much. I start with Arid. What was a question has been resolved. There was a final statement, but as we have described, only general agreements on very specific matters that nevertheless are the prevailing order to achieve peace in both regions. As greetings to all of you. As you said before, this summit seemed very pompous, that created expectation, but from the beginning it was born dead. It was a summit where they It was a salutation to the sun because they did not address important topics that had to be dealt with the Arab League that has decades of non-work and supporting the interests of the West and Israel. When you were talked about the Palestinian topic, they discussed this in the summit, but nothing new has come out in practice and nothing will come out from the hands of regimes like the Egyptian that are faithful supporters of Israeli actions against Palestinian people. Nothing is expected there, and as you said, human rights in the Yemeni war are clearly point out to the Arab League, and they wash their hands by saying that the summit had nothing to do with human rights and they wouldn't discuss that. This summit has been more propaganda than other things. Thank you, Aritz. First question to Abu Faisal from Argentina. The topic and the way how the contents were addressed and this place, tourist place on the Red Sea, give us some keys, especially the location, a place where several peace conferences, but near a terrorist bastion that has got very strongly questioned government measures. Exactly. We must remember that these summits always have a double standard. On one hand, the European Union, which is the highly responsible supporting terrorist groups. Let's remember Syria in 2011 with the intervention and aggression against the Arab Syrian nation, and on the other hand the Arab League that also has supported terrorist groups against Syria. These are essential matters. The summits on one hand tried to address these topics but never deepen in nothing because both are greatly responsible. The Arab League is greatly represented by the Al Saud monarchy that were the engines of terrorism, mostly against Yemen in 2015, with more than 60,000 victims, more than 5,000 children murdered by bombs. With weapons of the United States and supported by countries like the UK and the intervention of terrorist groups in Syria, where they have British advisors, including the white helmets, so-called humanitarian, that are criminal forces, and we also see the Egyptian regime that plays with criminal monarchies and issues resolutions, for example, against the settlements, but on the other hand keeps very strong commercial bonds with the Israeli regime. These has been 70 years of extermination. So these summits belong to who? These double standard summits. The Arab League is highly questioned. It's a league that has betrayed the Palestinian cause. Regarding what you are thinking, the Arab League works, how is the forces in balance, or what modus operandi works there? Because we had the league that Pan-Arabism was an idea that determined the Arab League's politics, the construction of an Arab country in respect to the member countries. Well, the arisal, on one hand, of the Arab cause as independence is very far away from what we've seen in the last times. The Arab League is more devoted to align to imperialism with Israel. We must say the Arab League last year said that the great party to blame in Syria terrorism was the Islamic Republic of Iran that should be taken out of Syria, and against Hezbollah. And he always joined the Al Saud monarchy. The Arab League betrayed the Palestinian case because they always sanctioned the Israeli regime but never did it in practice. The Arab League, through its diplomats, officials, and governments, have boycotted so this is a double standard. We know that what the Arab League means for the Middle East people, the League of Betrayal of Lies, defend the cause of national liberation that was the initial idea in its foundation charter, defend the Arab causes against imperialist aggression. But I reiterate, this summit is more double standards and lies, unfortunately always betraying the sacred Palestine cause. This is made this precision. How definitive is United States relation that changes from one country to another? We can't say that in one topic or in one country it's positive, because it's not. It's very complex, the relation of the United States with each country. So how definitive is to reach agreements in both blocs? They have common topics, but they have to address real topics. Who has promoted terrorism? On one hand, in Syria, U.S. troops must withdraw from Syria because they are there to finance terrorism. A European Union that should sanction those who sell weapons to kill children in Yemen. Germany says no weapons shall be sold, but France says everything is valid. And Arab families sell weapons with Al Saud monarchy. So these double standards with the United States, the great murderer of the world, imperialism that has a death agenda. And on the other hand, the Arab League never sanctions and violation of human rights, the Al Saud Bahrain monarchy that murder their own people. Therefore, these blocs unite just for commercial issues, to make more money, to sell more weapons. I'm talking about human rights, but human rights of whom? This is what we see, the European Union that approaches the Arab world, that is, and the European Union is highly responsible of the murders committed in the 21st century. We must ask the European Union how much is worth the life of a Yemeni child, a Syrian family that had to bear the bombs of terrorist groups sponsored by the West?
Okay.
Thank you, Abu. I will retake communication with Adi Sarit. All spokesmen say they are concerned for such a deep problem, but no specific action plan has been determined. Voltaire Network says that Trump's special envoy for Middle East, Jared Kushner, is the author of this controversial agreement of the century that has been changed, but we don't know much about it. It seems it consists on the creation of Palestinian entity sponsored by Saudi Arabia, although first they talked about Jordan, financed by the Gulf monarchies and not by Western powers, and the acknowledge of numerous adherences imposed by Israel. Nothing was said about this. I would like your opinion on this. Well, the self-called agreement of the century, I think we should start striking out the word agreement, because it's not an agreement. It has been decided unilaterally, where the Palestinian people has not decided and have not agreed anything with anybody. This is a pact that was born in the Arab League without the authorization of the Palestinian side. So it has no legitimacy before anybody. But I would also say that these actors, depending on the time, we see that they self-proclaim themselves as friends of the Palestinian people, and what they are actually are traitors to the Palestinian people. They can belong to Egypt, Saudi Arabia. They can have the eagerness to say they support the Palestinian people, but in practice they are allies of Zionist entity of Israel. And we've seen this lately in the blogs, where with Israeli bombardments on the Gaza Strip, and how Egypt closed its borders for the Palestinian people to block their entrance after Israeli bombardments and cutting humanitarian aid. The constant threats and references of the Prince Salman telling Palestinian leaders that either they accept the agreement or they will have to confront the Israeli army, almost threatening them, either you accept the agreement or you're going to be damaged. And they have no negotiating option or any kind of solution for the people that is struggling for decades, and that have Israel as its main enemy. The United States will never stop humiliating with this kind of agreement, so-called agreement. Understanding the differences and ruptures depending on the countries and topics, it calls our attention the implication of Germany in the Arab scene, that for some marked this summit and everything related to the 5+1 agreement and Iran. We must also say that Iran is the monster of the game. It is like the Iranian threat to conceal their shames and the reality of what they're doing. They always talk about Iran all the time. It is the same no matter for what, they're always attacking Iran. Regardless if Iranian weapons are defensive, they're always talking about the Iranian threat. We see it even in the case of Venezuela, where it is clear that the relation between Iran and Venezuela is optimal and is a positive relation for both nations and peoples. Well, they always try to mix things, and if it's not Iran, they say that Venezuela has Iranian effectives, even if this is irrational. In the end, They tell lies all the time, and the same happens with Palestine and Iran. The Arab League has been talking so much about the Iranian threat that they are trying to make it true. We have also the Syrian case where they are occupying Syrian territory, but until now they had never mentioned a Turkish threat, and suddenly they now are trying to claim it. And what reading can we make of this Turkish threat? It's not because they are concerned about the Syrian sovereignty. The Gulf kingdoms financed the aggression against Syria, but they're concerned that Turkey, a reference for Muslim brotherhood among the Sunnis, could become one of the powers of the Sunni side of Islam. And in view of this possible rupture in the Saudi hegemony, they start attacking Turkey also. But there is no Turkish threat, there is no Iranian threat. It is just the survival of Israel and the interests of Saudi Arabia in the region. It's only that prevails. And the rest of the countries of the Arab League just applaud what Saudi Arabia and the United States or Israel says. Aris Telesur's team thanks you for your opinions. As well as Abu Faisal, who we disconnected now. Now, Syria was suspended from the Arab League in 2011 after the war that started to defeat President Bashar al-Assad. This is important to say. Europe and the United States has exerted pressure and lobby to keep it from reincorporated, and in the League there is some kind of polarization. Some members want Syria to come back in full right, and others disagree. Why does this happen? What does this reflect? And we must also ask if the summit could be due, in the case of the European Union, to its fear of Russia and China filling the void and before the clear defeat of the United States in Syria. These are other variables to analyze. We will come back after the last pause. European Union, Arab League, common visions and goals is our question and critical move today. Let's go to the profile of both blocs in the Mediterranean Sea, with one suspension, Syria, and 28 in the other one, with a divorce that is still not clear, the UK. The League of Arab States has the Arabian countries of the Middle East and Maghreb. It was created for the independence of some countries colonized by Europe to avoid the Jewish minority establish an independent state. Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Yemen, at that time as North Yemen, are founding members of the League, all admitted March 22, 1945. Of that group of 7, Egypt was suspended in 1979 as being and the headquarters went to Tunisia, and Egypt came back in 1989. Syria has been suspended since 2011 when the war started to defeat Bashar al-Assad, something that has not reached its goal yet. The next one was Libya on March 1953, also suspended in 2011. During the coup that ended in defeating and murder of Muammar al-Gaddafi, membership was re-established in November that same year after recognizing the transition coup group. New incorporations were Sudan 1956, Morocco and Tunisia 1958, Kuwait 1961, Algeria 1962, United Arab States, Oman 1971, Mauritania 1973, Somalia 74, Palestinian represented by PLO 1976, Djibouti 1977, and the last country was the Union of the Comoros 1993, the southernmost of the group of the Southern Hemisphere. At present, there is a disagreement between those in favor and those opposed to U.S. intervention as Syria. European Union, a community union, a community bloc of integration and common governance of European states, 28 members, established with the first European treaty in November 1993. Germany, Belgium, France, Luxembourg, Netherlands, Italy as the founding countries adhered on March 25, 1957. Then came Denmark, Ireland, UK, 1973, Greece 1981, Spain, Portugal 1986, Sweden, Austria, Finland 1995, Cyprus, Malta, Slovakia, Slovenia, Hungary, Estonia, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Czech Republic in 2004. And most recently, 2007, Bulgaria and Romania, and Croatia in 2013. It has its own institutions and rules. Germany, France, Italy, and UK have the largest amount of seats in Parliament. 9 of 28 do not belong to the Eurozone, and they work with their local currencies. We would take Syria, suspended in 2011, had no representation in this last summit in Egypt. The Secretary of the Organization, Ahmed Aboul-Gheit, declared at the beginning of this month that the readmission of Syria with full membership demands consensus of the organization, and some have not even talked about their position. The situation of Syria was the main topic at the last summit of the Arab League. The debate goes in if it is allowed to return or not. Syria is a founder of the organization, suspended in 2011, because according to the Arab League, President Al-Assad did not want a political solution to its crisis. The powers are trying to influence, not to reestablish its membership. In February, we learned that President Macron pressed Egyptian president against Damascus. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Syria, Egypt renounced the Syrian recorporation, and European source underlined that by now it's important to keep a hard relation, even the recovery that would be impossible until there is no stable political process. The U.S. government is also pressing. Reuters informed that Washington held meeting with members of United Arab Emirates and other countries of the Gulf to press and prevent Syria returning to the Arab League. Some countries reopened their embassies in Damascus. At first, it could be seen as a reinstatement of diplomatic relations. Bashar al-Assad said he will not accept any conditions and that will go back as a full membership. The next, Saida Karash, spokesman of Tunisian presidency. We will continue with our guest Gabriela Aguirre, a member of the Communist Party of Venezuela and Secretary of the International Committee and Struggle for Peace in Venezuela. Gabriel, how are you? We were listening to an important topic, Syria, and we wondered if the European Union is thinking that they must reach agreements on this topic because it fears that two powers like China and Russia could fill this void that the community bloc is leaving. I think that we must summarize the main agreements of the summit because while there is no formal agreement, there are interests. All state meetings are made after military, economic, geopolitical agreements. For the European Union, the fact of continued trading with that region is very important. Continue selling weapons to the Middle East, continue importing from the Middle East significant resources like oil, and thus the important role of Germany, which is the fourth oil importer in the world. At least 20% of the European oil comes from the Arab world. And now there's something that is not as clear or evident, but has been developed under the table and was essential to call this summit, which is migration. For Europe, as we all know, the arousal of ultra-nationalist missions have advanced the need of controlling migration flows from the Middle East as a result of imperialistic wars that are promoted in these countries towards Europe. There is no acknowledgement, no acknowledgement or mention of the topic, but there is the interest. So in the specific case of Syria, first, a double standard of the Arab League that was born as an effort to try to unify pan-Arabism in that region and also confronting the interests of the West, because when the Arab League was established, there were great oil exploitations in that region, and they already foresaw it as a hotspot. Therefore, the sovereign state decision was to create an Arab League that throughout time was infiltrated. We must acknowledge the existence of absolutist monarchies and liberal democracy, most surrendered to U.S. and European interests. And in this Arab League, there is great contradiction, and therefore the positions, perhaps double standard of the Arab Leagues, because there is a great contradiction internally. An Arab League that in 2011 suspended Libya, and 4 months later they re-established its membership. In 2013, that it was worth. It said that what had happened in Egypt, where there was a coup, a military coup promoted by the West, mainly by the United States and Europe, were not anti-democratic, and therefore they wouldn't even discuss Egypt. But on that same year, 2011, they suspended Syria as a member of the Arab League with a vote against of Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq's abstainment. So this shows that this has been a strong dispute inside the Arab League has been increasing of countries that agree with reincorporating Syria and those that reject it. Because there is the fear that Syria play a role of a sub-regional power and accordingly increase efforts and change the politics of that organization. Now, is Syria interested in returning? Of course. There's a declaration of the Russian Air Force head who said that in order to have a complete success in Syrian territory, there should be full acknowledgement of the country in the region. What cannot happen is that based on wanting Syria returning in the Arab League. It accepts the terms of the Arab monarchies, because it is them who have tried to destroy Syria in different ways. In 2011, the monarchies and Qatar and the Gulf countries sent, besides their great corporations, to purchase Syrian currency to weaken the economy. Nonetheless, later it did the same in military terms, arming the so-called Islamic State. And this was the policy that the Arab League has used. And this has violated the respect of sovereignty, self-determination. That means developing inside the territory the political territories that the Syrian state needs to consolidate its success, politically and militarily, which is what the Arab League refuses to recognize. The effective exercise of Syrian territory, and this is part of the contradictions. Therefore, the resistance of the Arab League to say, to accept, it's now not only three, those who support the return of this country. They were confronted with Syria, for example, Bahrain, Tunisia, which are now re-establishing their diplomatic missions in Syria, but are also at the same time, for example, Sudan just paid a visit, the president of Sudan, that has many internal problems and protests. But this is the first visit of a head of state to Syrian territory. So this is part of what is happening in this game. There is a statement with UN processes we read in something written by Prensa Latina. We were wondering what UN actions, how they took place, what results, and how accepted were they in the countries, because it seems that addressing those conflicts that are important to achieve peace have been limited to recognize the role of the United Nations. Yes, that tells us something that I've said before. Seek to reform the current system of the United Nations, which today proves to be unable to resolve the problems of the world. And we see this in Palestine, in Sahrawi territories, with Morocco, with Syria. The United Nations is permanently appointing commissions that make reports, submit reports to the General Assembly, where they seek to advance resolutions, and sometimes resolutions are issued but have no application, no enforcement, because ironically, the defense of sovereignty of states is managed, and sometimes they use sovereignty, so whatever Bolivia decides to do in their territory is their option, and sometimes it uses this on the contrary. So this is part of the main critique towards the United Nations. It is undoubtedly related to what happens in Palestine, Syria, and other regions of the world where conflicts are not resolved with resolutions. It was seen that there's the need of advancing towards new ways of integration, both regional, sub-regional, and of the peoples, to make those historic matters that are part of the duties and interests of the peoples of the world have a result that aims to recognize the rights of the peoples and self-determination. At a time, we said that the European Union did not admit their responsibility in conflicts. Al-Mayadeen, some days before the summit, said that Czech First Minister declared that we as Europe have abandoned our position in Syria, and we have failed in Syria. This is also an important key. Thank you, Gabriel, for being with us. We now go to our conclusions. Well, definitely sincere declarations of things is missing. There are ambivalent positions on very important matters. While the Arab League addresses interfering from the United States, and the European Union does not admit its responsibility in this area, Europe is concerned for the refugees that cross to their border, but says nothing about its responsibility in what is happening on the other side, war and fragmentation. The relation with the United States is definitive, although it cannot be seen as a bloc because it varies according to the countries. And the truth is that what applies for one does not apply to the rest. They talk about a common approach, but in what terms? Is Europe willing to change its foreign policy with the Middle East? It says nothing about it. Are they talking about Israeli genocide? They don't say it. What they say is that depends on the European Union being the main trade partner of the League members. This is the end of our critical mood. We will meet again the next time.